she hated the phrase, "It is what it is." She hated it. She's like, "I hate that phrase." And I go, "Whoa." Like that was I can't remember if I said it or somebody else said it. And she had this really adverse reaction to it. And it was the first time we'd ever talked about that phrase. And I go, "Well, why do you hate it?" And she goes, "Well, people that I know that use it, they are self-defeating in the sense that they go like, well, it is what it is. Nothing I can do about it. Nothing I can do about this situation." And I go, "Do you know anybody that uses that phrase in the opposite?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" And I go, I love that phrase. Like, I love that phrase. I love that phrase because I say, if something bad happens, it's like, well, it is what it is. Now what? Like, now what do we do after that, right? Or even if it's external, like really big external things, like if somebody gets elected in an election, a national election that I don't like, it's like, well, it is what it is.
Welcome to They're Not Like Us, the podcast where bold ideas and inspiring stories come to life. I'm your host, Aaron, here to challenge the norms and ignite your potential. If you're ready to level up, don't forget to subscribe and join the movement. Now, let's dive in. Hello, welcome back to They're Not Like Us. I'm your host, Aaron, and today I'm joined by Lance Cayko. Did I pronounce that right, Lance?
Cayko. Thank you for asking.
Cayko, sorry. Welcome to the show, Lance. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I consider myself a serial entrepreneur. So I'm an architect, a builder, a real estate developer. I am a professional fisherman. I also teach at 2 universities on and off, and somehow manage to, and then I have a podcast, and somehow I manage to have a girlfriend and hopefully soon a fiance.
Is there anything you can't do, Lance?
I can't say I've learned. Then I have a nonprofit on the side too. I somehow am learning how to say no, because I think I am about as stuffed as you can get as a guy who's just trying to maintain.
That's a difficult job, though, isn't it? Learning to say no, especially if you're not that kind of way inclined. I have that problem.
Yeah, I think so. That was one other thing on the sort of learning to say no. I think learning to say I don't know is something that really is starting to resonate with me. Probably about 15 years into my running my own architecture firm, co-running it with my business partner. And I think about halfway through that, about 7-8 years ago, is when we finally got enough confidence to be able to confidently tell people we don't know, but we're happy to try to figure it out. And I'm confident that we can figure it out. And I think that's a really good sign of maturity for anybody when they can finally have the confidence to do that. I think a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, no matter what profession or we're in, or early on in our careers, and we're always trying to puff ourselves up and look a little bit bigger than we are, and sometimes that can come back to hurt you big time.
Absolutely. I think people respect, when you just have that little bit of vulnerability and bit of honesty and be like, actually, I don't know, but we'll try and figure it out together, or we'll try and get there. Because it's not always about knowing everything. It's about, being willing to put in the work. It's being willing to support people. I think if you're vulnerable, especially in a position where you're working with a client or you're in a leadership position, something like that, people really respect that, and they can kind of build that relationship with you then.
100%. Yeah. It's again, I think it's an overcompensation thing that people do, and I think the more confident you are in that, it just exposes your honesty to the situation. There's a lot of times I get client calls from potential clients, and I would say our hit rate for, like, doesn't matter if it's going to be a building client or an architecture client. When people contact me, then they're, the hit rate on when we secure those contracts is like 30% or less. So, I'm fielding a lot of calls and emails and stuff like that where we're not landing all of them. And one of the most brutally honest things I'll tell people is, in a lot of those phone calls, is say, hey, I'm not trying to talk myself out of work, but I'm also here to not do work that's unnecessary, and you might not even need my services. And then often there's been a couple instances where I've given that kind of advice or just candid take on the situation with people where I'm not trying to come off as a salesman that's super hungry and wanting every single piece of business that's thrown at me. And when I've told people that and then help them out and maybe help them realize that, no, you can do this task or whatever they have going on, yourself. There's been a couple of them that have went right to our Google business listing and given us a 5-star review just because we gave them good advice and we were honest with them, as opposed to maybe some other competing architect or builder who's just wishy-washy and maybe suffering from that imposter syndrome, or they're really hungry. I find it fascinating working with the general public like that as a business owner, and getting to experience things like that.
Yeah, I suppose anybody who goes to any business owner really is going to them to solve a problem of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Either, they need a skill set that they haven't got, or a product that they want, etc. So, by being honest with them about how they can solve their problem, and if they can solve it simply themselves, then they'll have so much more respect for you for that, because ultimately you've still solved their problem,
Yeah,
but you've done it without all the singing and dancing and all the pretending that they need you kind of thing. And then when they do need you, they'll think of you straight away and come back to you, right?
I think so. I think it's sort of that's the tricky part about any business, whether it's product or service based. I think it's definitely true what I'm about to say, and that is like you're playing an 18 hole game of golf. Sometimes it takes like several years for a client to. They might be went to your website, really liked what they've seen, and what you can do for them, but maybe they just can't quite afford you at that point, or they're not ready to move ahead, or who knows, whatever reason. But we've had people that have kept us on their radar for like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years before they finally contact us. And what's amazing then about having like a podcast companion to your business, whatever it is that's a way for people to always be in touch with what you're doing and understand a little bit more and really get to know you without first even meeting you. There's been a lot of times where I meet people and they go, I feel like I already know you because I've listened to your show, or I've seen your commercial on your website, and I put a face to the voice. Uh, then when we finally get to that metaphorical like 18th hole, the sales pitch is I've already kind of made it without even having to be salesy. I really love when that sort of happens. Like we've already gained their trust in that kind of a way. But yeah, I'll stand by that forever. I mean, but again, it took me. You would have if you'd attacked me in my first 5 years of business. There's no way I would have had that sort of confidence, or just in confidence in the sense of I'm just trusting that this is a long game and that there's a plan and there's some providence involved in the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it? It's a bit of a challenge, because a lot of small businesses, especially, fail within the first 5 years. A lot of them fail within the first year. So
Yeah,
at the start, a lot of it is about keeping float and trying to stay alive long enough to play that long game. So it's a real difficult balance to get right.
absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of people, when they start, I have been part of I've been a business coach before. I think that's what our podcast is all about, Inside the Firm, is that we're trying to give you an inside look and be your business coach without you having to pay us and that sort of thing. And maybe all of our advice isn't hit on the nose, but one piece of advice I've heard in and out of those circles over and over again is trying to niche down right away and focus on that niche and understand that like you're not trying to win every contract. Again, you're trying to win maybe like 30% or less. And that if you can see the value in niching down and maybe even winning like 10% or less, if you're winning 10% at a higher fee versus 30% at more lower fees, and then keep that equation going, like let's say you were winning 50% at even lower fees, what's probably the best use of your time? It maybe is niching down, but it's very difficult in those first years, as you said, Aaron, that especially when you think about the timeline, like the number I've always heard is most businesses fail within 7 years. But to speak back to years about where most of those percentage of like per capita failures happen within that first year, and then the closer you get to the seventh year, then you have a much less chance of failing as you hit those thresholds. Seven's a funny number in that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, business, because you need a lot of touch points with people a lot of the time, especially if your product or service is kind of what would be classed as high ticket. Then generally you're going to have a bit more contact, because you have to build a bit more trust. It's not just kind of a $5 little product or something you buy in a shop that that's meaningless to you, really, that doesn't matter, doesn't affect you. But if it's something that's expensive, or you have to save for, or it's going to cost you a lot of money and you need it to be right, then you need to build trust, and the way you build trust is having those touch points and having those interactions, like you say, visiting the website and maybe seeing some reviews and maybe having even interacted a little bit first.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, right. There's it's almost like I can never read enough books about sales either, because every time, like The Psychology of Sales was the last one I read about that. And it was a good reminder for me about some of the just most basic things I need to be doing. Like for me, since we do a lot of residential architecture, then I'm usually going into people's homes. So it's a very, when you talk about trust and gaining that kind of trust, like these are families that are like trusting us with maybe the rest of their family's existence in said house, right? And they're maybe going through a big renovation or something. But like some of the most basic stuff, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Like I should be, if I given the opportunity, and they offer me, like, let's say a glass of water, I should always say yes, even if I'm not thirsty. Yes, I would love a glass of water, take a drink, and then really try to get to the kitchen table at some point, literally, because most of the biggest decisions that a family makes are at a kitchen table. So that's already a place where they feel comfortable, and it's sort of a safe space for them to have those difficult discussions about how much things are going to cost, how long it's going to take, how much stress there is, and ultimately the person sitting across the table with them, can I trust them with all of those kind of decisions in concert with the clients?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we got to realize as well, because for the business owner, it's just another customer, another interaction, really. So it can easily be lost on how big of a moment, how important it is to that actual person, because that might be actually a big thing in their life. Whereas to the business owner, it's just business as usual. This is what I do. So it's easy to kind of get lost in that a little bit, and kind of almost not realize how big it is to the client.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, that's why empathy is so important. I think completely undervalued and undersold, let's say in the university arena, where we're supposedly supposed to be learning these kind of basic ideas about sales, especially if you go in for a business degree. But particularly like in my sector, architecture and construction, I don't remember taking any class ever, or any seminar, or even really any real big focus on empathy, and therefore trying to understand who you're designing for in that kind of a way and how big of an endeavor it can be. But thankfully, there's stuff like this where we're on a show and we're talking live, hopefully to an audience that's receptive to maybe examples of how you and I have then went sort of above and beyond, because we're probably both lifelong learners. We're embracing in that kind of way, because when you do a show like this, that's part of it. Like really, it's a place of passion in the beginning, right? And one of the things that I love about what I do on our show is I will interview folks like yourself, Perry, Mr. Perry, but like also a lot of authors. And when I get to interview those authors, there was sometimes I'll get through about halfway through in those interviews, and I will end up purchasing their book in real time. And then one of the most recent ones was called Train Your Empathy. And I had this author on the show because I was just seeking to understand more. And I was honestly a little bit traumatized from like my first wife, because she had said, you lack empathy. And I thought, man, I don't know about that. And what I loved about the book, because it didn't seem like it to me, I was just like, do I though? Because I'm working with all these students at the different universities I teach with. I have all these employees. Can I really be that bad of a guy if like all these people want to work for me, they want to learn from me, they want to hang out with me? And when I read the book, one of the first things it does is it talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And once they really define those definitions for me, it was proof. I was like, nope, I actually have plenty empathy, it seems. It's just I'm not sure I have a lot of sympathy for people that don't want to help themselves, right? Or, grow in that kind of a way. And it helped define me that way. And then the rest of the book was just a really good primer and reminder of how, especially if you're trying to solve other people's problems in the business environment, that, or even academic environment, that like as many questions as it takes to understand those people that you're working with and solve the problems, that's what you have to do. Like, and so what it transformed for me ultimately is I'm really adamant on when I go and meet with somebody who wants to hire us in some kind of way. 90% of the time, and 90% of the meetings, it's that I'm just asking questions of them and trying to understand and taking like really diligent notes. Only the last 10% is when I start talking about how I can solve those problems. And those are the most successful sales meetings. And even personally, when people come to me and they have personal problems and they're just looking for my advice, like I have these buddies that come down now every summer from college, and I take them up in the mountains and we go fishing for a weekend. And what's crazy is like all of a sudden they think I'm this relationship coach. I don't know why, because like I'm a twice divorced male, and it's like somehow they think I'm going to help them with their relationships, and then we end up doing that. But man, the whole time it's not like I'm not really talking about me. I'm just asking them and asking them, asking them, asking them. And it's amazing how many times like they'll come up with their own conclusions and answers after being asked. Just maybe that's what they want. They just want somebody that will listen to them in that way. Like I find the more I listen and the more I shut up in those interactions with people, that's what I need to do. It's like proof that like, oh no, that's what I need to do. Like my girlfriend right now, she's an architect too, and she thought coming into like our relationship even that she when I would she knows I'm a business owner, and she'd be like, oh well, it's you just in these sales meetings you're just bragging about yourself. I'm like, no, that is literally the opposite of how they go, and the most successful ones are the ones again where it's mostly me just seeking to understand.
Yeah, I think that's the crucial bit, isn't it? And especially if like you say, it's not just clients; it's humans, right?
Yeah,
We're all the star of our own show, aren't we? We're all the main character in our own movie, so we all have more interest in ourselves than anybody else, naturally. So if we ask people about themselves, then that kind of enables them to build a connection with you. Really, it's quite similar to what negotiators do. I can't even remember what the book is called now. He was an ex-FBI negotiator, and he's wrote a book anyway. And I think Never Split the Difference, that's what it's called. Pretty good
uh-huh,
book. I don't know if you've read that, but it's about negotiation. A lot of it is about you talk about them and get them to talk about them. You don't, by doing that, that's how you build that connection and that empathy, and enables them to kind of feel connected to you.
100%. That doesn't mean it's bulletproof though. Like a recent example of that was I work with I work with a lot of families that have figured out that mold, which is very much unseen in a house, like usually it's behind the walls, but then it enters the air, that they are finding out there's a lot of health issues involved with it, like that even affect your behavior. And it's sort of a bleeding edge kind of medical discovery that's going on in America right now. And these people are very traumatized by the situation. I don't blame them because like they've been told for like a decade by your typical Western doctor that this is not an issue for them, or like that it's something else. And then eventually they sort of find these edgier doctors and are pointing them towards the mold problems and everything. But the problem is like when I'm hearing all of the things from this specific sector of clients, I'm learning just now in the last couple months where I've been doing a lot of these interviews with them that I have to I have to better understand even like they're so hyped up and on edge that maybe their design problem isn't as big as I think it is, because I've been actually over the shooting the moon with that. So it's tricky. Like it's like you just never really stop with understanding how big the problem is or isn't after you're seeking to understand it. And I'm like, yeah, that's step one. Step one is asking all the questions and being empathetic, and then step two is maybe just giving even yourself as the listener on that like a little bit of pause of like, well, were they blowing things out of proportion just because their nose is so close to the problem and then mine is further away?
Yeah, you've got to be objective about stuff, haven't you? And you've got to look at the whole picture. But I think it does help if you listen to people and they feel listened to, because that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they say. It just kind of they want to feel heard, so that when you do communicate with them, they know that you've understood and accepted their point of view and where they're at, and then you can offer potential solutions, which may or may not be different to what they originally intended, but they feel heard, and you explain why you move into a different solution potentially.
Yeah. Well, that's the eureka moment. Like when, as I was mentioning my buddies earlier, like if you can get them to just come up with their own solution, and you see them light up at the sort of the very end of the conversation, like that's actually what you want. It's hard to give people a solution. I think I always try to give them like maybe an option or two, just so just so they don't feel cornered in some kind of a way. That's another, yeah. So that's sort of a tidbit that I'm realizing as well, is like maybe I'm forcing it if I just go run one solution sort of at the end.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely right. If it's your own solution, if you come up with that idea, then that's just you're on board with this right away, aren't you? So it's a great way to go with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I think like I'm not sure the general public understands like that is. I think you've heard the whole story about salesmen where it's like sell me this pen, and you've seen the story, right? And then I think at Wolf of Wall Street they did a big pitch on that, and it's like, yeah, that's Hollywood. But the best salesman, I think, is exactly that, where you get people to answer their questions at the end. And if the product or the service you're selling is then like they already made that conclusion on their end, it's like the perfect sales. Like you didn't even have to really make a pitch. You just had to make sure the product or the service was really good at the beginning, and then throughout asking them questions, the potential client is revealing to themselves, like, oh yeah, yep, this is the right person or entity for my product, and then all of a sudden they're asking you like, where do I sign?
Yeah, I think from TV we get this image that salesmen are that particular way, aren't they? Really push you really hard, and that's a good salesman. I think realistically, a good salesman, you don't even know you've been sold. You don't even know they've been selling to you because they're that good at it. And it's just like a conversation, and you think you've come to the own conclusion that this is what you want and this is what you want to do. And those are the best.
Yeah. And I don't want to like. I think then if you think so, now if I try to like understand the salesman as I am one, is that there's nothing about that felt sleazy. Like it feels actually really good in that kind of a way, and I walk away from like that meeting with a super ideally client, and then a super positive feeling about the situation. We're both on board. Nobody was like tricked or duped. None of that stuff is necessary. And I get where maybe the general population is like tired of the sleazy salesman. It's very obvious when the sleaze comes out.
Yeah, people don't want that. I don't want that myself. I've experienced it, and nobody wants that, do they? Let's be honest. Whereas, if we're gonna buy something, we want to have them honest, authentic conversations and kind of be led a little bit, but we don't want to be pushed. That's the difference, I think.
Which is crazy when it comes. I don't know how cars are sold over there, but that's one of my big complaints in America still is I'm going like my truck is 10 years old. It's a 2015 Suburban, and it's got like 240,000 miles on it. I love it. We have a history together. I'm like emotionally attached to it, and I'm like I don't want to get rid of it because I'm just dreading going to the car salesman in America, which is it's still very strange. It's still very strange because you don't get that honesty. Like you still feel like there's this weird dog and pony, and like they're still doing the same stuff where you go in and you go test drive a car, come back, oh I like it, yep, I think I'd like to do this or that, and you go, and then you say, but like let's say it's $30,000 or something, and you tell the car salesman, well, but like, is there anything we can do? Like the comparable car is like 28,000 or something like that. And then they do this dog and pony. Like it's so classic. And then they go, well, let me go talk to my manager. And then they go talk. I don't even know if they actually talk to the manager. Honestly, like I swear to God, I'm not sure they even go talk to the manager. But it is so archaic. And I wonder if they would actually sell more cars in America, like car salesmen, if it was just a little bit more transparent. Well, vastly more transparent. Like Tesla, I think does it really well. You can just order it. Like, here's your price. There's no negotiation. Just order it and be done with it, right? And that's probably why I think that's one of the reasons why Elon's been so successful. Beyond the products, his sedans anyway, being good products in that kind of a way. That's one of the last segments where I'm just like, why is this still in the age of the internet such a seemingly sleazy process?
Yeah, it's a bit strange. It is quite similar over here still
Okay.
in that sense. Um, yeah, it's weird. I don't know. It's really weird. But I've never worked in the industry, so I don't really know the answers or why it's that way. Whether it's not just like a cultural thing where it's kind of ingrained in them now, and that's kind of what they do, and it keeps getting passed down. I mean, generally, if somebody's looking to buy a car, they're going to buy a car in the next kind of 6 months or whatever, aren't they? Generally, so you don't need to be pushy, really. You can like actually help them, I think, and it would probably be more beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I would rather, yeah, just a little bit more transparent or something. It just feels like we're like trying to rip each other off or something. I don't know. It's goofy. It's like, help me solve
Yeah,
my problem. I need a new truck, and
and
I
it's
don't want to pay a premium.
yeah, and it's like you're saying about the price and stuff, like because like there's always that buffer range in there, so you always go in if you're going to buy a car, you always know, well, I can knock this down. This isn't going to be the price that I pay for it because that's just the listed price.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, well, why not just list them for the price that you want to sell them? Like, and be like, right, we don't negotiate. These just really good prices. This is the price.
Yeah, yeah, be done with it. Yeah. Well, maybe they'll all be listening to this, and then they'll change, right? We're that influential.
I very much doubt that, but you never know.
Yeah.
So, tell me about your podcast, lads.
Yeah, our podcast is called Inside the Firm Podcast. We started it 8 years ago. Like, I'm actually can't believe I'm saying that. Most podcasts, as you know, probably they fail within their first like 50 episodes or something. So we've been doing it since 2017, and I think we're on episode about 650, 670, something like that. Been pretty consistent with it. My business partner and I, Al Gore is his name, we started the podcast in 2017 because that would have marked year 7 for our first business together. And it was like, oh, we haven't failed yet. And you and I have already talked about that 7-year thing. And we said, wow, we haven't failed yet. Okay. We should tell, and we're already big podcast fans anyway. Like, a lot of guys our age are, it seems like, the Joe Rogan era, the Adam Carolla era of podcasting, the golden age of that, and us being able to have our voices. And we thought we should tell. I was kind of sick of sort of the poor me millennial attitude, of which I am partial millennial, like half millennial, half Gen X, of victimhood culture, and thinking that like the American dream is dead, entrepreneurship is dead, the whole world is stacked against me. And I do empathize with that generation in a way, but that was the idea behind the original show, which is every Friday Alex and I sit down, and what we did is we kind of went back in time, starting when we started at episode 0. It was just an introduction of what the podcast was going to be. But then we started talking about like how we started the business. We would look up old emails and kind of be refreshed by it, and explained how we started from nothing. Like, when we started our business, it was in the middle of the Great Recession, in an industry that was 50% unemployed, the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, because of the housing burst and all of that happened with the subprime mortgage lending and all the craziness. And so we wanted to just show that, like, yeah, we were dealt a really crappy hand of cards too. And we realized that, like, there's generations before us that were not, right? Boomers are a really good example of that. Like, right after World War II, everything was decimated except for America. And it was like every boomer in America was able to, like, jobs were readily available. The buying power of the dollar was very much more powerful. You could actually be a household where just the man went to work, and you had big intact nuclear families and everything. And then with every generation, like, the standards of living have gotten a little bit worse off in terms of buying power, in terms of being able to start a family, difficulties, all that kind of thing. So I get that, like, yep, those guys were dealt like a royal flush. And as the closer we get to Gen Z, it's like you're dealt a worse hand in the game of life from birth. I understand that, like, you can't pick where you were born and all that sort of thing. But what I like to tell people when I go give a lecture at a university, or sometimes on a show like this, or a pod, or somewhere else, is like we're in a private conversation with somebody and they're having troubles about that, and they're feeling like they should just lean into the victimhood portion of this. Is like, you're still playing the hand though, right? Like, you're still playing the game. And they go, yeah, I agree. And I go, exactly. So it's just that you've been given a bigger challenge in life than maybe a previous generation. Or even if, like, let's say you're born with you can contrast, like, the same generation today, Gen Z or something. Somebody's born with a silver spoon, somebody's born with no spoon, right? We're still playing the game. We're all playing the game, right? It's like, so what is the challenge for the person who was dealt a really crappy hand of cards, metaphorical cards in life? It's like, you got to play them almost perfect. I mean, you just have to be really on point about how you're playing your cards. And sure, like, you're going to make mistakes along the way. Like, a mistake that I made along the way when I was in college was, like, I had my first child at 21, and that's not conducive to, like, an academic career. I mean, I have to now have a whole nother kind of line of income. I can't stay in the architecture studio super late in the evenings, none of that kind of stuff. So, like, once I dealt myself that crappy card, it was like, okay, what is my reaction for hopefully throwing that card away and getting a new one? And what I had to do is I had to flip the script on myself, and instead of being a night owl, somebody who was up super late working on their architecture projects, I need to become a morning person, because I recognize that the only time I'm going to be able to carve out that space where I'm not interfering with, like, neglecting my newborn son and my fiance slash wife, was like really embracing what happens in the morning, hopefully before everybody gets up. So all of a sudden I was like, well, now every day I'm going to wake up between 4 and 5 a.m. before I have to get anybody else ready besides myself to go to daycare or whatever else, and make up those hours that I lost now that I can't spend in the evening, because I'm not here to neglect, my little family now that I've created and flipped it around. That's one example, I think, of, like, how you shuffle your cards around. But it's not like throwing the cards away and me going, I quit college.
Yeah, I think, it's a difficult one, because people, like I say, they struggle to see outside of their own little world, their own little bubble, and it is easy to fall into that. Oh, poor me! I've got it so bad. When, again, even though, like, the things you've said, financially, people probably find it more difficult to buy property and stuff like that now, as the generations come up, but also they've got it better than they've ever had. So, like, the technology that my kids have access to, and, like, the house that they're growing up in, like when I grew up, it was like a building site. My parents were working really hard to try and, bought this old house, try and make it, suitable for us and make it a nice place to live. And they worked really hard, and they gradually made things better, whereas my kids have already got a better standing because my parents put me in a better standing and stuff like that. So there is a bit of a dichotomy to that as well, isn't there, where you're starting from a better point, but then it's harder to get to the next stage, I suppose.
100%. Yeah, and then if we zoom out even further, so I agree. Like, it is a dichotomy, and I don't want to paint that, it's like, oh, every generation gets worse. It's that mindset that you hear in this, toxic media that we always are living with. But if you zoom out even further, right, then like I always ask, I've been lately asking the question. I'm like, is there, and I think about this as a business owner too. It's like, and you hear this about all the, when people are complaining about, like, corporate greed or something, it's like, yep, we're trying, like, exponential growth is probably not sustainable. So at what point, are you going, okay, enough is enough? That doesn't mean, like, we're going to go back into the hole, everything. I just think it's a really interesting thing to think about. And that's kind of been on my mind lately, as last year we didn't have very, our profit wasn't as good as it was the year before and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, you're going to have those years. So but maybe some of those negatives end up being positives. Like, I try to live my life by the law of polarity and just recognizing it. So it came out in interviews, like, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. My kids I had supper with them, and they asked, when my son was like, "Hey, Dad, it seems like you, like, never get scared." And like, is there really nothing that scares you? And I'm like, no, of course things scare me. And I go, when I get the most anxiety and the most scared now is when it's just all positive stuff happening. And they go, what? And I go, well, it seems, because I just know, like, it feels like feels like it's too good to be true and the rug's going to get pulled out from underneath me. And I go, do you know when I actually get most excited? And they're like, when? I was like, when something bad happens. When something bad happens. I'm old enough now. I'm like, I've just seen it happen over and over again. Where like, let's say I have a really, really bad Wednesday, just an awful Wednesday for whatever reason. Like every client is mad at me that I've dealt with that day. My kids are mad at me if I made a bad supper, whatever. And then the next day, it seems like it's like just nonstop W's. Like, wow. Then the next day, I signed 3 contracts, and all of these things. But then I try to think about it like just as a back to that sort of hand, this metaphorical hand of cards analogy. And growing up as a kid in the 90s who was a huge fan of NBA basketball, and therefore Michael Jordan was my hero, and the Chicago Bulls and all of that, is if one of the best things that ever happened to him was he got cut from the basketball team between his sophomore and his junior year. He didn't make the varsity. And he took that negative and he just turned it into the metaphor, like what everybody calls the Michael Jordan chip. You got a chip on your shoulder, and he worked his butt off that summer, and now he's Michael Jordan. Like, yes, the journey was much longer than that, but that negative thing is the one thing that sparked him into the positive part of it. So I really, I'm not saying I'm looking for bad things, but I don't like panic or like get into a negative mood about it. I really just try to be like consciously meditative about it and recognize it's happening, and then look for the positive lights that come in after that, and really try to exploit those things.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good attitude to have, actually, because, like you say, we can't avoid the negative. And, we have to enjoy the positive to the best we can, and see the negative as that kind of springboard, really, to kind of push us forward. And I think if we can do that, then it puts us in a really good position mentally to cope with stuff, really. And that's half of what we do, is the attitude we bring to it, really. If we bring a good attitude towards stuff, even when things are going badly, then it puts us in a really strong position going forward, because our life ultimately is a series of decisions that we make over time, right? Panning out. So if we continue on the positive path, then eventually we're going to get the payoff for it. Whereas if we just feel sorry for ourselves and start being negative, doing, negative things that are kind of taken away from our life trajectory is going to change negative, right?
Yeah. That's like my girlfriend hated before I didn't correct her, but I asked her this. She hated the phrase, it is what it is. She hated it. She's like, I hate that phrase. And I go, whoa, like that was I can't remember if I said it or somebody else said it. And she had this really adverse reaction to it. And it was the first time we'd ever talked about that phrase. And I go, well, why do you hate it? And she goes, well, people that I know that use it, they are self-defeating in the sense that they go like, well, it is what it is. Nothing I can do about it. Nothing I can do about this situation. And I go, oh, well, do you know anybody that uses that phrase in the opposite? And she goes, what do you mean? And I go, I love that phrase. Like, I love that phrase. I love that phrase because I say, if something bad happens, it's like, well, it is what it is. Now what? Like, now what do we do after that, right? Or even if it's external, like really big external things, like if somebody gets elected in an election, a national election that I don't like, it's like, well, it is what it is. Like, yes, maybe I voted, maybe I didn't. Like, maybe I tried, well, my one vote or whatever. But what am I really like affecting every day? Like, where does it start? And a book that I read that I thought that has really resonated with me, I read it about 4 or 5 years ago, is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I'd heard about Marcus Aurelius, from all these bro podcasts and stuff over and over and over again. You need to read Meditations. You need to read Meditations. And I was also really intrigued by just the words stoic and stoicism, because I had thought, just like I thought about the empathy part, I was like, well, stoicism, I think it means just like me and Aaron are on a show and we don't talk. We just look at each other. It's like, no, that's not what it is. Like the real version of stoicism is having that it is what it is mindset, recognizing the problem or the positive thing, and going like, well, what can I immediately affect and can take control of, right? It's like me and my family, me and my children, then me and my business. And it starts with that real, actually, it's me. It's me waking up every day. Like, what do I do when I wake up every day? Like, do I have a morning routine that's positive for me and my health? Oh, do I? Yes. If the answer is yes, great. And then you can move on to your family. You expand your what can I control? What can I take control of in my life in a positive way? Your nuclear family. Then if you're like me and you own businesses, then you're probably like, okay, then my extended family is my businesses. And beyond that, maybe it's my community, right? But notice how I haven't even touched or allowed myself to get real angry about like the financial markets. That's beyond me. Politics. That's beyond me. Like the weather, right? Like I can't control that kind of stuff. And so now I read that book once a year. Every summer when I hike up and down the mountains in Colorado, like I make it a point to read that just to keep myself in that mindset because it's been a very, very helpful in my life.
Yeah, I like that. And what I tend to do as well, what I've done has helped me is just remove negative influences a lot as well. So, like the news, I was like, it's always negative, man. I don't know what it's like in America, but in in the UK, it's just the news is just always so negative. It's just like they just want to make you depressed. So, it was affecting me. So I just stopped watching it probably 9 years ago now, and I've been so much better for it because it was really bringing me down.
Yeah, same. 2 years ago, I stopped listening to podcasts, like listening to those kind of podcasts, like news podcasts that had anything to do with politics. I just completely removed it and just replaced it with music. It's one of the most coolest things that I didn't even think would happen when that happened is like I have this amazing relation. I have this like renewed vein a brand new vein with my children that I didn't even think would exist. They're super into music. One is 15, one is 20. The 20-year-old makes music. And so I they ask me for music recommendations, which is completely nuts, and then they show me new music and stuff like that. And we just have this like way it's just a much more positive and like back and forth, gooey, happy. I was picked up my daughter yesterday and this song from like my uh, adolescence, like it was by this band named Hoobastank was playing, and it's called I can't remember the name of the song, but they Reason, that's what it's called. Reason by Who was I started singing it in the car and she was like, "When did you learn how to sing like that?" And I'm like, "I kind of always have. Like you wouldn't have known that unless I made that change in my life and moved in that direction."
Yeah, it's nice, man. I mean, I listen to music with my daughter. She's into like she's only 8, but she's into like music and stuff. So because she plays guitar and
Mm.
there's like plays on stage at school in a band and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. And it's good to see them kind of express themselves in that way as well. And it's nice to be able to kind of join them in that kind of creative kind of space that when they're in that creative space as well.
Yeah.
But I still listen to a lot of kind of audiobooks and podcasts and stuff like that as well when if I'm alone in the car, I'm driving or whatever, commuting and stuff like that. But yeah, sometimes you just need that music and it just kind of chills you out and just brings you back to like a 30-minute commute can really kind of just settle you down, can't it, and sort out any anxiety and stuff with a bit of music, bit of good vibes, and kind of
Yeah.
changes the way you think. It's quite powerful.
Yeah. I like how place setting it is. That's for me, it's like music is a place setter. I mean, it brings me back to like a very specific place or time. Uh, I have like a very certain set of music that I feel like is winter music. It's kind of like I just lean into winter actually. Like that's another. I mean, there you go. I mean, I kind of mentioned the weather like 2 or 3 minutes ago or something. It's like I live in a cold climate, so if we're just gonna be angry at it, it's like no, I'm just gonna embrace it. Like I actually really, really enjoy winter in that kind of a way. I mean, and then in the summer, it's like well, it's hot, so then I recognize that, but like I'll escape, go to the mountains, and do that kind of stuff. That's just I think the way to live is like. And then if you hate that cold environment, it's like well, okay, if you really can't lean into winter, I get it. Some people, just can't do it. Maybe they don't have. I have a little bit of body fat, so I'm sure that helps. But if you can't, man, what can you do to move your? What could you do when you wake up that first day? and you're hating it. And it's like, is that the first day you decide that you're going to make the moves to move and get out of there? Because you're thinking about yourself again, right? Like you're these expanding bubbles of what can you control in a positive way.
Yeah, I don't know with weather. I've never really got annoyed with weather. We don't have great weather in the UK. You know, it's often wet and dark and miserable. But I mean, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, you just dress for the occasion, don't you? And as long as you dress for the occasion, then it doesn't really have that much of an effect. And I don't mind the rain and stuff like that. So it's not that big a deal. I don't understand people who let the weather get to them where it affects their day. That I don't understand. You know, yeah, unless you're unfortunate and homeless and living on the street, then it can really, really mess with your life. But apart from that, if you've got a home to go to, and you can put on some warm clothing if it's cold, or I just don't understand it upsetting your day.
Yeah, not worth it. It's not worth it. Life is short, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
just gets shorter and shorter and shorter, especially as you hit middle age, and then you're like, well, I'm halfway there. It becomes more precious. It's weird. That's a weird dichotomy, isn't it? It's like when you're a child, it seems because your whole life is ahead of you, and because your consciousness has experienced only a small portion of that, then time seems bigger to you. And so but then again, you cross that threshold. I mean, that's when I really started to, if there's any positive things about COVID, like one of them was, I think, teaching us life is very short in a lot of different ways, not only the disease, but like freedoms and restrictions and all that kind of other good stuff. And I've just tried to really be ultra intentional with my time after that. I was already before. Like people ask me all the time. I know we started this podcast for like saying all the things I did and then how do I have time for it? I'm very intentional with my time. So I will pull up. I even have this in some of the lectures that I do, where it's motivational speaking type of stuff to students or whoever, and they go, "How do you do all the things you do?" And I have a slide that's pulled up, and it's a screenshot of my calendar, my Google Calendar, and it looks completely overwhelming, but it's not. It's just I have everything scheduled down to almost the minute, and then people go like, "Geez, that seems really like anal and restrictive," and I go, no, discipline equals freedom, because I had the discipline to be intentional with my time, then it gives me the freedom to make sure I can carve out time where I want to for my friends and my family, all of those kind of things. So I make sure that there's enough space for everybody in my life. And then also you got to be constricted. Like I constrict the work week. You know, there's a lot of architects and creatives who just get really obsessed with their work, and I don't blame them. Like I have those stints too, but you can't let it just overtake you to where like, let's say you woke up at 6 a.m. and then all of a sudden you blink and because you've been so enthralled with your design problem and really into it, and then you blink again and you go, it's 6 a.m. the next day. Well, you know, there should be a little bit more intentionality with your time, because you got to have some balance to that, right? And then ultimately I've been thinking about, instead of balance, I don't know if you guys have this phrase over in the UK of like work-life balance. It never really sat too well with me. And in the last couple years, I've been thinking, shouldn't it be more about like work-life harmony? Like harmony is a much better word for that. So this summer, I have a nonprofit. It's a community garden, and I would tell my girlfriend about my day. At the end of the day, she would go, she's like, "Well, tell me about your day," and I would say, "Well, I woke up, took Kaya to school or tutoring, and then went back and did some staff meetings for a couple hours, and then I jumped on my mountain bike with my backpack and I went to my community garden and picked vegetables, and then I went to my second other garden and went and picked vegetables, and I came back and ate lunch, and then I went back to work." She goes, "Oh man, it seems like she goes, I did not expect you to have any sort of that much time to do that." And I go, "Well," and I told her about the calendar all that, and she goes, "Seems like you could have good work-life harmony." I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna really lean into that." And trying to emphasize that is like, I want to have a good work-life harmony, because I feel like when you use the word balance, it's like a scale enters my mind, and I go, "Oh, I'm like trading one for the other." I'm not sure that's where I wanted to be.
Yeah, I don't know if that's born from people not happy in what they're doing in their jobs a lot. I think if you're not happy in your job, it probably is work-life balance, right? Because
Yeah.
you don't want to be there. You don't want to be in that job, wherever it may be. And then, you're doing it just so that you can have the life element, so that you can have that freedom to live how you want in that short time that you have. And I think if more people found something that they genuinely wanted to do and enjoyed to do, I think that would really change their whole concept of it and the way they look at it, I think.
Yeah, this is a really good point. Exactly. Yeah, not some people, right? Because I mean, I feel like I'm very fortunate that I'm 41, about to be 42. I knew at the age of 13 what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a builder first, and then I became an architect later, and then back to builder, and then all of it or whatever. My brother is a perfect example of that. He says he wants to be a professional hunter, and he is. It's not his full-time job. So he does a lot of whitetail deer hunting in North Dakota with archery. He's like a world famous guy, but like he still doesn't know career-wise what he wants to do. My son doesn't know what, my first wife doesn't know. So I recognize that I think most of people in society actually are probably doing jobs that like, it's not their passion, right? And how do you monetize that? I think that's probably always the trick.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people we get pushed a lot to do. Oh, you got to do a job. You got to do this. You got to go
Hmm.
to school. You got to get qualifications. Got to get a good job, and that's how it's always pushed on you as a kid, and how it's sold. It's never ever pushed on you to find something you enjoy and then find how to make money from it. That's not really pushed, not until you're already an adult, I suppose. And by then, often it's too late if you've got a family, you've got a house, and people feel like, I can't leave this job now because I got to provide for my family. It becomes a difficult situation for people. So I understand why people get kind of trapped in careers they don't feel like they don't want to be in.
Yeah, I know. My son tried to go to school twice, and he just dropped out twice. And Dad wrote the checks, and then he tried to work for one of my companies full time, and it just started going downhill pretty big. And but recently, in the last 60 days, since I loosened up and I said, Kyler, like you don't have any big responsibilities, so it's actually okay that you're just kind of floating around and trying to figure out what you want to do. So why don't you can come work for me like a couple hours, 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours a day, no big deal. As long as you're paying your rent with your girlfriend, taking care of your car insurance, like you've taken care of yourself. You have some, come, and then I'll even help. I'll feed you. Like after work, come to my house every day. Let's just feed you. It's all good. I get some company with you, and you can pursue your very creative modeling, music, and all these other art kind of careers. And man, like his demeanor has completely changed. So I just felt like I'm a little like uh embarrassed that I didn't come to that conclusion sooner for him. And that's the positive part about it, is like it did happen at the end, sort of thing. But man, it's been a great like couple months lately, just because I felt like he needed the pressure pulled off.
Yeah, I really like that, Lance. And actually, I know you say, oh, you should have figured it out sooner, but a lot of people never ever figure it out and never ever give their kids that freedom when they're young adults, which is probably the time when they need it to kind of figure out life and figure out where they want to go, what they really enjoy, and how they can make that their life really. So I think it's amazing that you've done that, and that's you'll be better for it. My kid's not of that age yet, but when they get to that age, I think that's something that I definitely want to encourage. Give them that opportunity while you can, especially if you're fortunate enough to enable them to do it, then allow them to do that, and kind of, I think their lives will be better for it.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
push kids into a box way too much. We go to school, they got to conform, they got to do all the same things as everybody else and fit in with everybody else, and then university, then you've got to get a job, and we kind of push all the creativity out of them and push that kind of freedom to express themselves and find who they really are.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and then they got to get the mortgage. Like it's like go to school, get the mortgage, get married. I know. It's like, oh my gosh, like whatever. And it's all for like this. It's weird GDP. It's like, yeah. So Well, thanks for saying that, Aaron. I mean, I still feel a little embarrassed about it, but I'm glad I'm there.
No, I think it's a good thing, and to be honest, I don't know anybody else who's done that or is doing that. So that's that shows how rare it is, really. So I think that's an amazing thing that you're doing, and hopefully lots of people will start doing that.
Yeah. Be like me, everybody.
Lance, where can people find you if they want to learn a bit more about you or find your podcast or your services?
Yeah. Podcast-wise, go to InsideTheVerbPodcast.com. We're on YouTube. We are on all the major platforms like Spotify, iTunes, and all of that good stuff. We do 2 episodes a week. I do a Monday morning show where I'm interviewing people like Aaron. I'm interviewing authors. I interviewed the late, great John McAfee at one point, the software developer who did McAfee antivirus, stuff like that. And then the Friday show, we're talking everything inside the firm: architecture, engineering, construction, real estate development, entrepreneur, business-wise. I'll link in with anybody. If anybody goes to LinkedIn and they just type in LANCE, last name Cayko, Cayko, I'm the only one. I will link in with you. And then if you want to see if there's anybody listening and they're ever looking at trying to hire an architect, a builder, moving to Colorado, that sort of thing, they go to f9productions.com and check out our work.
Lovely. No worries. I'll make sure I put some links in the show notes as well, make it a bit easier for people to connect. Before we end the show or bring the show to an end, Lance, do you have any final thoughts or messages that you'd like to share with people?
Keep the faith. Keep the faith. Remember the law of polarity, and that when the negative stuff happens, it's a good thing that the universe operates on that, because something positive will come in the end of it.
Love that. A lot of time for that. Lance, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Appreciate you.
No worries. Take care.
Yep.
Thanks again for being part of this journey. Stay tuned. We've got even more great conversations coming your way.